We're live. Okay, good afternoon, good morning, warm welcome to everyone. I'm Giri from Giri's Adda, and before we talk about Girish Menon, who has joined us, and engage with him in a conversation, a few words about Giri's Adda itself. So I started this very little online space a couple of years ago as the pandemic had struck, and I wanted to do something in the space that I always love doing, which is reading books, singing songs, and engaging in conversations. So Girizada is all about books, songs, and conversations. And my fond hope is that this will lead to a better world. So this is our 87th episode. If I add up all the episodes together, so Girish, you're on our 87th episode. The songs, the books, the conversations. Um, in the conversations, I've had some very interesting people coming in into Giri's Adda. We've had quite a lot of panel discussions about various topics over the months and so on. And in May, we spoke to a very wonderful person called Geeta Ramanujam, who's a storyteller based in Bangalore. Girish is the second individual that who's coming in. Uh, Girish, in fact, the reason why you're here is uh, I also saw your post on Facebook about your book about which we will be talking. And I said, no, I need to now talk to Girish and reconnect with him after several years. Okay, so a warm welcome again to everyone who's tuned in. And for those of you who uh, may not know about Girish, a very few quick words of introduction. Girish is an author. But more than that, I think he's been a development practitioner for the last 37 years, which is a very, very long time. And that journey began in 1985 in Gujarat with the Aga Khan Rural Support Program. Girish is also an alumnus of the Institute for Rural Management in Anand in Gujarat in India. And there's a very, very interesting anecdote about how he got into IRMA in his book, and I'm sure he will recollect that for us. Since then, Girish has worked in a number of organizations that include a very well known NGO called as the Reaching the Unreached, which seems to have been one of his substantive experiences in the development sector. The Aga Khan Rural Support Program itself, another important part of the trajectory. Then our paths, my path and Girish's path, crossed in Plan International in 1999, and we were colleagues together for about 4 to 5 years. And soon after Plan, Girish joined DFID, the Department for International Development. He was there for a short while, and then he moved out of the country. He's right now based in London, so a bit of an early morning for Girish there. But in the UK, he's been Chief Executive Officer of ActionAid in UK. He's also headed WaterAid, which is a well-known organization working in water, literally, across so many countries. And right now, Girish heads the CEO of an organization called Stir Education. So it's very interesting to see Girish in the education space, which is where I have been struggling for the last 30 odd years. So, Girish, thank you very much for very, very readily agreeing to be on this. Little discussion. It's all about you, your book, your thoughts, your trajectory. And I must, of course, say that Girish is going to end it all by singing a couple of songs for us. So I think for those of you who Naz Khair says, Girish, hi. So Naz has worked with you. So there is Ashish Sharma, there is Shanti Dasri. There's a lot of your friends, Mrityunjaya Shastri, Gabita. I think all of them are saying hello to you, Girish. Uh, so let me begin by showing our colleagues this very wonderful slim book, which in fact, I had to get this book from a friend of mine in the US because unfortunately, it's not available in India. It's not available online as well in India. So Girish, that's something that you need to probably work on because, and very quickly, this book is though it's a very slim collection. Um, it's got 31 articles, which in a way sums up Girish's experiences in India. And as you notice, he has written this. The title says "Memories from Afar." Dash India, which basically means that he's going to be talking about memories from other places as well. Um, and It's a lovely book, and I think it's a great way for any one of us working in what we call as the social development sector to put together our thoughts, ideas, and so on. So let me begin, Girish, by asking you about the book itself. How did it happen? How did you come to it? Is it something that you woke up one fine morning thinking that you need to, start writing a book, or was it in the making for many years? All yours.
Thank you very much, Giri, and thank you for this invitation to your show, which I have seen. I've watched a few episodes, and it's always very impressive how you manage to find the time to do something very different from your day job and connect people. And this has also been a good medium to connect with you at a personal level. Haven't met you in so many years now. Possibly we haven't met for the past
2004, I guess. Yeah.
2004 is possibly when we met last. So it's great to reconnect with you. And in addition to thanking you for the very generous introduction to myself and to the book, it's also a tribute to your amazing singing. And I must say that across all my interactions, I haven't come across a better singer for Kishore Kumar songs,
Thank
especially
you.
when it comes to yodeling. And I'm delighted that you're also making waves in the education sector. So, coming back to the book, I had a habit of writing blogs,
Hmm.
and it started possibly about 15 years ago. I still don't remember exactly when or exactly why I started, but I suppose when I used to go and visit
15 years ago would mean somewhere, sometime after you left the country.
pretty much, yes, pretty much, yes. And I think that's when you're then out of the country, you
Hmm.
often miss the country, right? Because that's where you're born and brought up. And you miss the people, you miss the interactions. Um, and there were two things, I suppose, two drivers. One was I used to narrate some of these stories when I come back home, particularly to my children, and they would
Right.
always enjoy listening to it, even though they were too young to recognize the context of that, right?
Hmm.
It used to come up in discussions with my wife, Sandhya, as well, but they didn't really have that detailed context which I had going and visiting communities. So that's one thing. And the other thing was some kind of a fear within myself. What if I start forgetting the stories? Because,
Hmm.
your memories tend to stack up. And there's every likelihood that the farthest of the memories, which may be the most precious of the memories, um, are the ones that you tend to lose. And there was that fear
Hmm.
of losing out on those memories, or as they call in the social media world today, the FOMO, the fear of missing out. So
Homo.
in my case, it was a fear of missing out on those memories.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what started this whole process of putting that as a blog. And then every time I used to write a blog, I used to start feeling that I'm living that moment. It was a very
Hmm.
invigorating moment. You took the names of some of my friends there on the show, like Naz and Ashish and Shastri and others. Um,
Yes.
and it's at that time that you start thinking of, uh, you know, you start thinking of those people as well who were with you.
Right.
I know Shashi is on the call as well, from all the way from Canada, for instance. Now, when I was writing those blogs, it also brought back and revived memories of those friendships, those connections that I'd made.
Hmm.
And that was the one driver that just kept me going and say, okay, just keep writing, just for yourself, just keep it right. And
Hmm.
then, as a few friends saw it, they would always say, "Oh, you must compile it into a book." And I'm like, "Oh,
Hmm.
it's too hard, like it's very difficult to go behind a publisher and get it published." And I've heard lots of stories about how much time and effort it takes. And that's when I came across the self-publication option
Right.
on
That's a
and
boon. That's a boon for many of us now.
it's a boon for many of us. And of course, it has its pitfalls, as you would have seen,
Yeah.
that the formatting could have been better, the layouts could have been better,
There are
and
these minor glitches, yeah, but I'm sure
yeah,
you'll be able to overcome that in your next edition.
hopefully, because to be honest, I thought that I was just working on a manuscript when I was uploading it, and little did I realize that it had already gone out, and the
Oh
Kindle
no.
version was available, and then you had to press on the paperback, and that came available. So ultimately, it was about just trying.
One question as you're talking about the book, and before it goes out of my mind, I think what I am amazed when I look at this book is the number of names that you have recollected from that journey, right? And I think for an anthology or for a collection, it's an amazing thing to do. I mean, you practically mentioned so many people, including people from communities, young men, women, adults, and of course your own colleagues and so on. So was that something that you were making a note of, or was that just in your head? What was it? I mean, how did that happen?
Pretty much in my head, and I can recollect each one of them. Whether you talk about Samu Ben and that moment when she talked about the seed bank, or when you're talking of Kesar Bai or Ramya. So Samu Ben is from Gujarat,
Okay.
from a village called Sapar, and
Yeah.
Shashi might remember her because we met her, we worked with her. Or if you're talking of Kesar Bai or Ramya Bai in Madhya Pradesh, or you're talking of Alabai in Gujarat, or you're talking about Selvi and Saravanan in Tamil Nadu. All these names are so vivid in my mind, and I suppose it's a tribute to them because they left that lasting impression. So to be very
Yeah.
honest with you, I really don't have to make an effort to remember their name because they're just etched in my memory. They're just as much etched in your memory as you would for your immediate family members and close friends. These are people whose stories, there's a lot of joy in all those stories. If you have seen, even though the contexts in which they're placed have been very adverse. So
Yes.
these are people who have gone through several years or decades of marginalization and discrimination, but yet what I saw in them was how they overcame that with that spirit, with that resilience. So I've
Yeah.
got very uh, inspiring memories of them, and I can still remember when they said something in a meeting in a village or in a neighborhood in a city. I can actually remember what happened when they said something. It's just that they
Right.
left a lasting impression.
Wonderful. I think one of the features of this book is that there is so much positivity. I mean, it's not as if you have brushed aside or overlooked those adverse circumstances, but then what comes out practically in every one of these stories is the indomitable human spirit, and that you have brought to us these people who almost all of them have a never say die attitude, that wherever they are, whatever may be their circumstances, once a certain set of opportunities is provided for them to participate and for them to bring out whatever potential is within them, they really do wonderfully. I think these are great, and very, very amazing and inspirational tales, in fact. And
Absolutely, and they also make you realize the privilege that you have had. Like in my case, growing up in Ahmedabad, in a city, going to one of the best English medium schools in the city, St. Xavier's in Mirzapur in Ahmedabad, having a family who cared for you, who put your needs as a priority. Your parents who prioritized the fact that you had to be taken care of. Your education is really important and continued that support throughout a
right.
circle of friends. We have grown up in so many of these privileges, and often we forget that because we also have adversities in life, but those
Mhm.
adversities tend to take a larger than life form at times, and it pulls us down, it depresses us, or it makes us feel that life's a big burden. And then when you look at some of the individuals in this story, you just realize how incredibly privileged you are in terms of your personal circumstances. At the same time, you also have the sense of privilege that you actually got to meet them and they taught you what life is about and how to face adversities in life.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that you have also mentioned in your book in terms of your own privilege as a person and those opportunities that you've got. Um, let's move on with the book itself. Is there, I mean, I know all these stories are very close to your heart, and all the people that you've mentioned, of course, many of them probably you're not in touch with, and some of them, have stayed with you on that journey, colleagues and others. Is there any one particular instance or story that you would like to recall for us, which has been one of those few life changing kind of stories for you, which also finds its place in the book?
Yes. This is the story of Samu Ben in a small village in Sapar, in Surendranagar district of Gujarat.
Hmm.
Surendranagar district is a drought-prone area. Year after year, they have droughts. Every 5 years, they used to have 3 years of drought years. And as part of the Aga Khan Rural Support Program, we started this a large program of water conservation, which we refer to as a percolation tank. So the whole idea was that people would work, they'll create these earthen dams, and water would be stored when the rain falls, if the rain comes at all in the first place. That was a program that had about 500 people in it, and we wanted to be a good employer, so paying wages on time, with zero corruption, making weekly payments, making sure that the people working on the site were well respected and taken care of. There's water available, because this used to be in like 40, 45 degrees heat. There is
Hmm.
somebody to take care of the children, particularly women who would bring the children, that the children could actually be taken care of while the women can do their work. And we had started a compulsory savings program where 10% of the wages would sort of come into a savings account. Now,
Hmm.
the work got over, the rains came, there was water, there was joy all around.
Hmm.
But the point also was, what do we do with this money?
Right.
And the men immediately said, oh, give us the cash, we'll buy something. Now, we know exactly what happens when you give cash to the men. So we said, no, no, no,
Right.
nothing doing. And I must really here bring in the then chief executive Anil Shah, who
Hmm.
always used to say, listen to the women, listen to what they have to say. So
Right.
I still remember very, very vividly. There was
Hmm.
Anil Shah as a CEO, my colleagues from the Aga Khan Rural Support Program team, having this big, like about
When you
500.
say Anil Shah, is Anil Bhai,
Anil Bhai,
popular?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Anil Bhai, as he was fondly referred to as.
Right.
He retired as a secretary, rural development from the government of Gujarat, and then he became
Right.
the CEO of AKRSP. I still remember very vividly that summer time, and there's a shamiana, and there's about 500 people there. And there's this big discussion what to do with the money. And then some
Hmm.
women said, okay, when Anil Bhai said, talk to the women said, oh, give us utensils. And they started laughing and giggling. And again, Anil Bhai, no, no, think hard, think long term. That's when Samu Ben very quietly stands up. Now this is a highly, highly patriarchal society,
Hmm.
very, very patriarchal, and there used to be a lot of violence as well in that
Hmm.
area. Violence because of agriculture, cattle, all those tensions, and there was a very, very exploitative system that was in place, and it's very hard for any person from the so-called lower socioeconomic group to even say something in a public forum, let alone a woman. But there,
Absolutely.
Samu Ben stands
Hmm.
with her sari covering her part of the face, because she has to do that because there are older men from the community there. So she has to keep her large, as is to call it. And
Right.
she said, give us seeds. And that
Hmm.
was a penny dropping moment. And immediately you could see, I mean, Anil Bhai was transfixed. He said,
Right. Right.
wow, that's a great idea. And he knew exactly why she said that. But he said, no, tell us more. Why do you need the
Yeah.
seeds? She
Yeah.
said, we never have money to buy seeds. And it's only when it starts raining that
Yeah.
we then scurry around to get some seeds. So a, we don't have the money, so we have to take money at high levels of interest, and then by the time we go to the market, the best seeds are gone, so we get the worst kind of seeds. And
Right.
then the crops invariably fail because the seeds are bad, and that pushes us further down to indebtedness. So if you give us seeds, and if we have money for the seeds, we can be sure that that process of planting the seeds happens at the right time, not after the
Right.
rain, but well ahead of the rains.
Hmm.
And that's when Anilbai said, that's great. Then let's do
Hmm.
one thing.
Hmm.
Let's start a program to invest in the seeds and create a
I think
revolving fund.
in one fell swoop, Samu Ben probably combined all the theories and everything that we know about practice to just present it in such a simple manner that look, this is what
Exactly.
we want actually.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm talking of 1987, and
Yeah.
1987, this was an absolutely brilliant idea because something like that had not happened in that whole area of Saurashtra. I can't say for the
Right.
rest of Gujarat, but at least in the area of Saurashtra, that had happened. But even more striking was the fact that this one woman from the Koli Patel community, who was one of the backward communities as it's defined by the by government language,
Right.
the courage to stand up
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
say that in the presence of so many men from her community. What I also remember is that her husband then looking at her with
Ah.
real admiration, right?
Wow.
And he was a
Wow.
lovely guy. He was a lovely guy. I forget his name, but I remember his face. He was a lovely guy. And that little dynamic was also very interesting. But the striking image is still someone standing, face covered in this big crowd, Anil Bhai sitting there and saying, "Give us seeds."
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Great. So I think again, I find this book fascinating because it's got so many stories like this, and I would encourage colleagues and friends who are watching. This is not to market Girish's book, but then this is to market the fact that there are, I mean, amazing stories here. So please pick up the book. And I think the other thing that I liked about the book is it's written very simply, no footnotes, no jargon, no technical terms. So it reaches out to a large, it can reach out to a large number of people, including if you have in your homes school going children, give it to them because it can be very inspiring. It can probably get some of them move into, doing something like this. Girish, there are four or five people that you mention as people who have inspired you and from whom you have learned a lot, right? And these names keep coming up in your book, in one way or the other. One of them is, of course, Anil Bhai, about who you've already talked. The other one, which I find literally almost in every chapter, is brother James Kimpton, right? The British missionary with whom you have done a lot of work. Salil Shetty, who headed ActionAid at one point, and Shankar Narayanan, who's probably with us on this show. Let me just scroll up to see if Shankar is there. No, he hasn't joined. Uh, can you tell us a little about these people who have inspired you? What is it that you've learned from them?
So let me
I know
start with
it's a long journey and you have had long associations with all of them, but it'd be interesting to know.
absolutely, absolutely. Let me start with Shankar, and the reason why he's not on the call is because he's in the US, and it's possibly like
Okay, the
half three in
time
the
is the
morning.
problem. Yeah.
Yeah, time should be the problem because it's a bit too early for them. Uh, I was never interested in the NGO world or the development world, however we term it, because even my entry to the Institute of Rural Management that you mentioned was by fluke, because I wanted to go to the Indian Institute of Management. I wanted to be a marketing
Marketing.
person. Yeah, out and out marketing. I wanted to sell soaps, shampoos. Tell me what to sell. I can sell it, or I will sell it. That used to be my dream. I didn't get into IM, but I got into the Institute of Rural Management, which was a new concept.
Still with those hopes, I
Still with
guess.
those hopes that one day I'll sell soaps and shampoos, right? But the advantage of the Institute of Rural Management, or IRMA as we called it fondly, is that it was a new institute. It had a brand new campus, brand new hostel, and they actually promised you a salary, a job and a salary at the end of the course. So
Hmm.
you would not be left in lurch. So
Hmm.
as a destined, I actually got a marketing job, and I was the marketing officer or the officer in charge for the Bombay depot of a
Hmm.
large oilseeds cooperative in Gujarat called Growfed. And
Okay.
I had an office near Flora Fountain. I had a cabin of my own. I had three telephones, a white color, a green color, and a black
Wow.
color. I had a PA, I had an accountant, and an office boy. They were all just doing whatever. And mind you, I was all of 22, and I was just above a major art gallery. So if you go down, you would see people like MF Hussain walking in and walking out of those art galleries. So very, very posh, right? but it was very boring, to be honest. It was such a boring job, and I just didn't get any sense of satisfaction, which is when I thought of visiting Shankar, because he's a very, very dear friend of mine, and that was just a 5 hour journey from
What was
Bombay.
Shankar doing at that time? He was running an
Shankar,
NGO.
Shankar had already joined the Aga Khan Rule Support Program,
Ah,
and
okay.
he was in this place called Netrang in South Gujarat.
Okay.
And um, I was not interested in what the organization did or what he was doing. I just wanted to meet him because I was staying with my aunt, so none of my friends were there at that time. So I thought I'll go and meet my friend. And so I went there, and Shankar I suppose he was happy to see me. I was definitely happy to see him. And then he said, "Oh, come on, let's go to the villages. Let me show you my work." I said, "Village? Like, who wants to go to a village? Come on, I come from Bombay. Why do I
Right.
want to go to a village, for God's sake? And why do I need to see your work? I've come here to spend time with you. Let's just chill and spend time." And he said, "Listen, I've got this bullet motorcycle, so we can ride on the bullet motorcycle." I said, "Ah, that makes sense." So I'm happy to sort of jump on the bullet, and
Right.
and so it was literally a drive for me. And that one drive changed the entire course of my life, because what I saw him and his colleagues doing changed my perspective. I
Wow.
saw them
Yeah.
having meetings with communities. I saw them sit with families and talk to them about their livelihood. So they were initiating a program on social forestry, and the
Okay.
whole idea was to grow more trees and get an income out of trees in an area where it was largely dominated by the Adivasi community, but there was a lot of deforestation. So people were losing their access to traditional livelihoods.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, and obviously causing more impoverishment. So basically, this program was to bring that back and put the power and the economic power back into the community through these self-help programs. And what I saw completely, I straight away went to the head office of Aga Khan Rule Support Program, which was in Ahmedabad, met Anil Bhai, and said, "I want a job in this organization."
Okay.
That's exactly what happened. And of course,
Wow.
Anil Bhai being Anil Bhai, he didn't say anything. He said, "Okay, next month there's a monthly meeting where we have all
Come
the
and sit
three
there.
come
Yeah.
and sit, observe." He made me observe the meeting for the whole day. It was like 8 hour long meeting, quite grilling actually, because
Mm.
he wanted progress report on every single project. He was quite demanding as a boss. At the end of the day, I think it was around 7 o'clock by that time. He said, "So what do you think?" I said, "Sir, I still want the job." And that's how I got it. And that then changed. So there was no looking back. So
Okay.
that's
Wonderful.
a Shankar story, and he still remains a very, very close friend of mine, and we're in regular touch.
What is
Uh,
Shankar doing?
Shankar is a senior social development specialist with the World Bank, and
Okay.
after stints in India, Afghanistan, and Indonesia, he's now in the DC office, Washington DC office,
Wonderful.
and still
Tell
working on
us,
South
tell
India.
us about Brother Kimpton Girish, because he's probably the most central character in your book.
Brother
I mean,
Kimpton, yeah,
from my reading, at least so far.
exactly. So you hear about all these.
And by the way, there are a few people who've said hi. Bibas Chatterjee from Gram Niyojan Kendra. I mentioned to you about him today morning on Facebook. And then Snehil Rathod, who is right now in Chhattisgarh. She works with UNICEF. Uh, and I think she's also had a stint with Stir India. I'm not sure if probably before you
Probably
joined.
before my
Yeah.
time, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Hey, hello everybody, and thank you
Yeah.
for joining. To all those who are there, brother, you hear about all these spiritual people who are really selfless, and I used to believe that there is nobody like that, because everybody
Mm-hmm.
is there for
Mm-hmm.
their own vested interest. The
Mm-hmm.
nearest I've come to anybody like that is Brother James Kimpton, the
Mm.
most selfless person I've seen,
Mm.
the most the closest to living the life of a true ascetic, with very, very little personal belongings,
Mm.
hugely charismatic, uh, devilishly funny,
Okay.
and massively persevering.
Wow.
Uh, and he left England at the age of 20, because he had already decided that he wanted to become a missionary. So he joined the order called the Delisle Brothers, left the country in his early 20s, went to Sri Lanka, became a
Mm-hmm.
teacher, and he was also a cricket coach there. And after several years in Sri Lanka, teaching in the school and teaching cricket, he moved to Madurai district in Tamil Nadu because I think his mission wanted him to come there. He
Okay.
did a lot of work with what was called the Boys Town, which was a vocational training center for orphan boys. And
Hmm.
then he did
I
something
think you
which
also had a small stint managing a hostel, right? A boys' hostel.
that
You've
was
written about that.
with the reaching the unreached. Yes, yes. And he then did something which potentially was quite radical for his time, which is he wanted to do something very different, not just what the order of De La Salle was asking to do. And he
Hmm.
wanted to get into a more broader community development program and live closer to the community. So he started something called a boys village, which was again for orphaned and deserted boys who are much younger, and making sure that they're well taken care of, they're well educated, and they learn vocational skills. But then he realized even that was not enough, because that was just tackling just the boys. That was an area with a lot of female feticide and female infanticide. And he also saw a lot of poverty in that area, a lot of issues on health, particularly leprosy and TB. So a lot of old people were not being taken care of. So he started a very large multi-sectoral program where he was pretty much doing everything. And he
Hmm.
very proudly used to say, "Oh, we do everything from the womb to the tomb."
Oh, okay.
Meaning there
This
was a strong,
trademark
yeah,
humor.
there was a strong antenatal care program, because we ran a primary health center till dignity in death, because we had this program for old and infirm people who had nobody to take care of. And of course, in a village situation, you don't really have a proper care system that takes care of anybody. When people are
Hmm.
old, they were just left, and people used to just literally leave them out because they were a burden to the family. So these are the
Right.
people who would be taken care of, and when they die, it was about a dignified death. And everything in between. So we had a community development program, a health program, a textile program for employment generation. We started a savings and credit program. So it was quite amazing. And every time he and for people like you and me who come from a very professional side, we would first think of a strategy document, and we had an operational plan, KPIs, and all that.
Right.
Working with Brother Kimpton, me at that time when I started working with him, I was 25, right? And he was probably in his 60s. There was a massive, not just a generation gap, but a gap of perspectives. He would just come and say, "Okay, so tomorrow we are developing that village." And I'm like, "But
Oh,
brother, we need to plan." And he said, "No, no, 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 no. I've been there. I've seen that village needs us, so we are doing this, that, and the other." But brother, we don't have the funding. I mean, look at our budgets. Did you see our budgets? These are all committed funding. He said, "God will give."
oh God. Okay.
Every time, and it will frustrate me like no end. And I'm like, "Brother, God doesn't always give. You need to find the money." But lo and behold, I don't know how he would do it, but within a week, 2 weeks, the money would have come.
Wow.
The
Wow.
money for that project
Amazing.
will come. I haven't seen a better fundraiser than him, because he used to just write. All his fundraising came through individual contacts. He would just write letters to all kinds of
Wow.
people, handwritten letters, beautifully written. He had a fantastic handwriting, and he had a way to really get the money out. And it was truly amazing what he did.
Wow.
Insatiable
How many
energy.
years? How many years was your association with him?
So I worked with him for 4.5 years,
4.5 years.
but I continued in touch with him. I went there for 3 or 4 times after I left. When I came to the UK, I was on the board of Reaching the Unreached UK that raised funds for them. I'm no longer on their board, but I still am in touch with some of the board members. Of course, he's no more. He died a few years ago. I think he was in his early 90s, but his legacy is, that's when you hear a lot about religious leaders doing all kinds of things, and sort of they tend to be very wealthy. They've had thousands of followers and live in palatial this thing. Brother Kimpton, his workroom was a 10 by 10 feet room, and
Wow.
his living quarters was also a 10 by 10 feet room, just a room with an attached toilet and bathroom, just one bed. That was nothing. He had no person. He would spend zero money on himself. Everything that he had, the clothes he wore, the pens he wrote, the pads he had, he used to love pens and color
Wow.
pens. Everything was a gift. He wouldn't buy anything for himself. Anything for
Amazing.
himself.
Amazing. It only goes to underline how important it is to have those mentors and coaches early on. And I think that's something that you're probably now in your present work also talking about more and more. Girish, I have a surprise. There's a bit of a twist in the tale for you. And there's somebody here who's going to pop in into the studio and say hello. Just give me a minute
Okay,
and be
that
prepared
sounds
for
quite
his
intriguing.
question. Ranjan, welcome.
Oh, hi, Ranjan.
Hi, 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 hi.
How are you?
What
How
a,
are you?
I'm good, Girish. And what an occasion. Thanks to Giri for arranging this
I know. Yeah, thank
conversation through
you.
Giri's Adda. And when he did mention to me, I said, "Oh, of course, this would be a great occasion to catch up with, uh, you know, people you have had an association with as long as we have had." Um,
Indeed.
I don't know whether you remember or not. I'll help recollect. Um 1997, 98, you came to Hyderabad, and I think that was the first time you and I met. Sandeep Chachara used to represent Actionate then,
Yeah.
and there was an event. I'm forgetting which event it was, but I think we both
Ranjan,
attended.
Naz says hi to you.
Eh?
Naz Khair says hi to you.
Hi Naz, long time, long time. Hi, hi, hi. Be speaking to you soon. Then after that, as luck could have it, I happened to join Plan, and Girish was one of my referees when I joined Plan. So that's the association, which dates back to 97, 98, if I'm not
That's right.
mistaken.
Almost 28, 25 years ago. Wow,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
long,
Yeah.
long time.
So,
Yeah.
You have a fantastic
and
memory, Ranjan, but it's great. What a great surprise to see you suddenly pop up.
no, no,
As I was
ulta
mentioning, Girish, I got in touch with. I mean, Ranjan and I we have not met. I'm not sure when the last time was when we met, but sometimes over WhatsApp we are in touch. And I wanted him and Anita to come, but unfortunately Anita couldn't join in today. Maybe some other time. So Ranjan, do you have anything specific, any specific recollection of Girish? Any question for Girish?
Oh
Anything that you
yeah,
want to
yeah,
say?
of course, of
Yeah.
course. I mean, with the kind of experience Girish has had while in India and having moved to the UK later on, I did
Just
over
1 minute for those who are watching, friends who are watching. Ranjan, Girish, and I were all colleagues in Plan International many years ago, and Ranjan is also a very dear friend. Yes, Ranjan. Yeah, carry on.
yeah. I since I was overhearing part of the last bit of conversation you're having, uh, funding. I mean, people like Mr. Brother Kempton and others, uh, and there could be probably a few more whom one can recollect who used to work like that. And God knows how, but they used to get it. Uh, but in today's world, move fast forward. In today's world, it's becoming a great challenge more and more. With corporate social responsibility coming here to stay, and the kind of expectations that the um corporates have, how do you, in your experience, I'm talking about a global platform, a global arena, in which canvas rather, in which how does this CSR pan out? I mean, the expectations, there is a everlasting conflict between the NGOs and the kind of corporate social corporates, that the expectations, NGOs feel they're unrealistic. uh, they want instant results. Like one corporate head once told me, we're running a nutrition project, and it told me that you'll have to have 10% increase in reducing 10% reduction in malnutrition in a 3-year period. I had to tell him that, um, look, the government of India, with all its power, forces, HR under its command and resources, is unable to do that kind of a percentile increase over 10 years. Now, you want this to happen in 3 years is unthinkable. Why not? We really had to invite two or three experts to convince their management that it's not feasible, it's
Hmm.
not done, right? So how is it how does one balance that out? Because this is going to stay, and with the institutional funding gradually diminishing by the day, how does one balance that? Because this seems to be persisting.
Yeah. I mean, you raised a very, very significant issue, Ranjan, and that's like my day in, day out kind of a kind of a
I'm sure.
challenge
I'm sure.
that you have, as many organizations have also faced. So,
Yeah.
I suppose
We
in
are
the show,
facing it. UNICEF has that huge challenge, actually.
there you go. Yeah. Even with a brand like UNICEF.
Yeah.
So I suppose there are no easy shortcut answers to that, other than the fact that you need to stay your ground, just as you did by saying that this doesn't happen that way. The other thing is to see, who are the key policymakers or decision makers within those CSR organizations. And what I have always found is that the power of stories is really, really what moves mountains.
Mhm.
Even if they talk about a 10% reduction in nutrition over 3 years, every time, what I used to encourage my colleagues and what I try to do myself is to start with a powerful story of change that is authentic and that is something we have actually seen happen. And
Mm.
so obviously in the education sector, we have exactly the same questions about, how soon can children start reading and
Learning
writing,
improvement. Yeah.
learning improvement, right?
Mm.
Now, of course, we have a big debate on what does learning improvement actually mean. There is a very narrow definition of foundational literacy and numeracy, and we're trying to push against the tide by saying that that's just the beginning. But what we really want is social-emotional learning,
Right.
lifelong learning. Very, very difficult to track. So we always say, and I always use that for myself, but I also suggest to colleagues always start with a story of change. And one of the big stories of change that I heard last year is from a Delhi program where I was again asking my colleagues, like what's happening. And they were telling me about all the processes, the activities, the mean. And no, 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 no. You know, give me a story, make it visual for me. So then this guy, my colleague from the Delhi team, he said, so I went to the school in one of the schools that we work, because we work in pretty much all the secondary schools in Delhi. I went to this school and I was talking to this group of boys, and I was asking them. So this is my colleague Shadab who's narrating the story to me. What change have you seen in this school? So the boys said, okay, just look around the school, right? There's a compound wall and there are gates. The purpose of the compound wall and the gates is to keep us inside so that we don't run away. But what the teachers don't realize is that if you want to run away, we can run away
Yep.
whatever comes in our way, right? Because
Absolutely.
we know how to scale the gates, and we know how to scale the compound walls. Sometimes there are pressures at home because we don't have enough money, so we have to go and earn something, or there's some other emergency, so we can always run away. But today we are telling you, break the compound walls, keep the gates open. No one will leave the school because this is a changed school. The teachers are different. The school has changed, and we wouldn't want to leave the school even when the school hours are over. And I said, hold on to that story, because that's a transformational story of change, even if it's only of one school. And from there, try to explain the theory of change and the milestones and the progress and everything, because you've already caught the attention. And this is a true story, an authentic story, because he can name the school, he can name the community, everything else. So I therefore believe in that power of stories, because I do believe that even though you have, people studying in the top universities of the world by taking decisions, ultimately there's a little bit of the heart that comes in, and it's not always the head. That So how can we be better at telling those stories and bring those people around to say this is a long-term change program? But as I'm telling you, Ranjan, there are no easy answers. But this is the best bet that I've seen. In addition to everything else, like working together as a broader community of nutrition organizations, so that everybody's saying the same thing. Because again, you need, like, if somebody else says, "Yeah, I will promise that we can do that," you can be 100% sure that they will not deliver, but they might get the money because they've made those promises. So it's a little bit about that authenticity. So I'll keep harping on this point of authenticity, of how do we speak based on the deep knowledge of a program, but what is realistic, but also capture the imagination of people with those really important stories of change. And there are millions of those stories of change. We only need to look
Absolutely.
for them.
And I think one of the things that we fail to do adequately is to document experiences. And as I was saying, Ranjan, in case you're not aware, we've also talked about Girish's book.
Yeah, I saw his post
You're
regarding.
aware of the book,
I'm
okay?
aware. I'm aware. Yeah.
A lot of wonderful stories there. There is one question from Snehil, which I think is a follow up on what you've said, Girish. And her question is, any suggestions on how do we seek this kind of support system?
Sorry,
Any suggestions on how do we seek this kind of support system? I think she probably refers to what you said in terms of creating those support systems, and how do you create those support systems is what she's asking.
great. Yeah. Now, again, a very, very relevant question. There's always a power in numbers. So, for example, on the kind of education that we are talking about, we've been talking to the Schools 2030 consortium, which is being hosted by the Aga Khan Development Network. So they have got a number of really big influential players like themselves, of course, but also the Lego Foundation and many others who believe in having a more holistic approach to learning. So I think it's a lot about coalition building. It's a lot about getting into those consortiums because, and that is difficult. It takes time for a simple reason that every organization is initially focused on survival, but also to deliver its programs and then to demonstrate accountability. And we tend to have therefore a lot more internal focus. So if we can shift that balance to say internal focus is important, but at least a handful of people need to look outside to build those bridges with those coalitions, because there's power in those numbers, and it's about getting more and more people to
Hmm.
move those massive mountains rather than doing it ourselves.
Hmm. Hmm. Right. Yeah, I think what we are also realizing is collaboration has to be the order of the day. There is really no other way of going about it, especially because resources are dwindling. There is increased competition for the same pie, and everybody's kind of wanting to do the same thing. In fact,
Yeah.
um,
I think just to give me a second. The To take this particular argument forward, you know, what's happening is the working together. Um, all of us remember that we've been speaking about it for ages, but it has taken decades to come to a stage where probably there is this strong realization that yes, one must work in collaboration in tandem with others, but still then there seems to be
it's not
a
happening.
right. So uh, I think to begin with, now that the governance of organizations have become stronger, so I would like to believe, um, with their own respective boards and things like that. I think the board also needs to be convinced that when you work, there should be if not a policy, at least a tacit recognition that my or the board that the representation that I have in um, organization X's board, uh, we as a board would agree that the agency would work together with others, and the results, the numbers, yes, numbers are powerful, but those numbers, it's all right to be shared. It's not that it's mine, I have to report this to my donor, and
Hmm.
yours is yours. That is, that is where the things become haywire. And in fact, when organizations get into consortia also, what they do is, I find that there has to be an in-depth understanding of each other's culture, values, and the operational mechanisms, so that you know what you're getting into and know what to expect, and work on your strengths rather than weaknesses.
Hmm.
Many a consortia fail just because of that. Everyone is in a
True.
hurry to
True.
get into a consortium and deliver. Yes, deliver by all means, be accountable, but
Hmm.
not at the cost of the quality, integrity, and the efficacy of the program. That's number
True.
one. Number two, I won't lose this opportunity. The story bit. I find that, I think I tend to uh, think that probably we are from a different era altogether or something, because people, you mentioned documentation, and Girish very elaborately talked about powerful stories, and he has written a book on that. But the younger generation, I find, no criticism of that, but they also want instant results and kind of don't want to invest time. Field visit means, I mean, Like you, Girish, we were running the organization I work with now. We were running primary health centers, and every time there is a need for a story, people go to the field, and it's about drugs है कि नहीं, this is supply chain काम कर रहा है कि नहीं, MOIC attendance ले रहा है कि नहीं, all that mundane routine stuff. Take a few bites from people who are benefiting from the primary health center. Take a few bites from the local governance structures. Talk to them, have meetings. I myself must have told the medical officers that in a month, not more, at least once, just go to the village and sit under a tree and
Talk.
talk to the people, and just write a paragraph about it or something.
Yeah.
I
And
think Ranjan,
just to add to that, I would say, and use social media, because the thing is, if you can't beat them, join them. So the young people are getting obviously more into social media, but also the kind of social media they get into are very different, because now it's all largely about TikTok or Instagram. And it's about how do you get, in today's world when there's so much of information coming into you, how do you find that 30-second story or a 1 minute story that will actually grab somebody's attention and then bring them onto that journey? So that's a skill.
I think Girish, my take here is that part of the problem is with the donors themselves. Part of the problem is with our reporting frameworks. Part of the problem is we are so stuck in those frameworks, in those boxes, and in those KPIs as you were talking about. Nobody, or very few people, think of using narrative descriptions today when they write about what they're doing.
Yeah,
And I think that way your book is a very, very nice exception, because you have brought in people's voices. And what many, maybe report of 200 pages is not going to say, a few pages are going to tell, because they communicate emotions. Somewhere I think within the development sector we have forgotten how to communicate emotions, which is really at the heart of what it is all about, how people feel, right?
absolutely.
So somewhere I feel that we really need to uh, go back to the drawing board to see how we can better represent what we are doing, and how we can tell those stories better, actually.
Yeah.
And of course, stories of authenticity, and so on and so forth. There's a question, a couple of comments and questions. So Naz Khair has this question for you, Girish, which is, Girish, I've been in the anti-caste movement for a few years now, and I find the whole system so dead against education of the so-called low castes. So, what's your take on that?
Discrimination is rife, and which is a very sad part of it. And we talked about patriarchy earlier. Patriarchy in all the different forms has gone and further marginalized and excluded people, and that continues. Very sorry to hear from Naz about what she sees there. What we do need to do is to see how do you therefore bring about the change within the entire system. Uh, Often organizations, because we are small, we tend to work in a small number of projects, or a small number of villages, or a small number of communities. This requires something that is much more transformation at the political level. So how do we start working at the government level in whatever way we can? Because again, I'm not saying that with any sense of like it's an easy thing to do. It's immensely difficult, but it starts with changing attitudes from within the system and moving upwards. And there's a story from Uganda that I just heard, and I know it's Uganda. It's not India, but it still shows a sign of hope, where you can change those deep held beliefs, which sometimes are referred to as cultural beliefs. So after the pandemic, when the schools opened, Uganda had the world's longest lockdown of over 2 years. All schools were closed for 2 years. So when they came back, they found that many girls had been married off, and these are students in school, and they were coming in with their children. Or some girls were pregnant, and they still wanted to continue education. The male teachers found it a bit offensive, and they were like, no, this is not right. You can't bring your kid to school, and they pushed them out. So our teachers, what they typically do is that they have what's called teachers network meetings, which is a network of 20 to 30 teachers from across the area who come and share some of the problems, challenges, and then find solutions for that. So this problem was brought in by a male teacher who said, "Oh, this is now a big problem," and that one identification of a so-called problem led to a whole debate within and among the teachers, where the women teachers then challenged this particular man and said, "Do you know that your attitude of keeping such girls out of school will permanently push those girls out of education completely? And do you know what kind of an impact it can have on her life?" So instead of pushing her out because she is a teenage mother or because she's pregnant, why don't you look at the circumstances that got her into the situation? And so it was a 3 day conversation. And I believe at the end of it, the male teacher said that, this is the first time I'm looking at this issue with a very different lens. Let me go and talk with my other colleagues and make sure that we actually are much more empathetic and we put in the support system. Now, that's a very small story of change happening in that little community of 20 to 30 teachers. But for changing deep held attitudes on gender, on caste, on religion, or on any other broadly referred to as social cultural practices, does require those changes at the small scale and then push it further up the system, because it's very hard for that change to come from above to below. That's what we've seen everywhere. Otherwise, that
Right.
change would already happened. So, how do you sort of build that groundswell of change? But sadly, this is not going to happen overnight, and these are like held over so many centuries. But we have to keep on pushing those boundaries in every single way we can.
Yeah, I think the point that you're making, Girish, is it also resonates with what I think, which is that in the context of education, at least, things like teacher preparation must start embracing uh, more comprehensive ways of looking at behavior change. It is not just a technical problem of developing teaching learning materials. It's not only a pedagogical problem. It's a lot more social, it's a lot more socio-political. And we must, find the space to talk about these things that are uncomfortable, that are not easy, but
Yeah.
it's important to have those conversations as part of teacher development courses and so on, both in service, pre-service, and so on. I have one question, Girish. We are coming almost to the end of this show. One last question about your book, which is, while the book talks about these amazing people and the stories, uh, and all of them are pretty inspirational, what I find uh, missing in the book, if I were to use that word, and perhaps it's something that you can explain, is that somewhere it seems to me that you have shied away from making a larger political statement about legislation, about policies, about what governments do. Is it something that came to your mind as you were, because as you would agree, a story often offers a window to look at something larger. So we use the story, we use the characters, we use their circumstances, we use their experiences to also make a larger comment, or make a commentary about uh, larger and deeper issues. So was that something that came to your mind as you wrote the book, and did you kind of take a conscious decision not to move into that space?
So that's very well highlighted, Giri, and I agree with you 100% on that. A couple of reasons. One is, as you've seen, the stories are a bit dated, so they go back to the 80s, 90s, and the context has changed significantly. And while I'm still in touch with India on a regular basis and Indian organizations, I don't feel I have the right, again, from a point of authenticity, I'm not the right person to comment on what is happening. So that's kind of one reason, because um, you're absolutely right about looking at issues of the broader socio-political framework or the changes that are happening, and see where you make the connection. But sometimes you feel that you're not as fully informed because you're not actually living it on a day-to-day basis, is number one. Number two, very frankly speaking, that's also not my area of strength, because I think the whole issue of policy is very complex, and we have seen people put in years and years of research to come up with something that can be distilled for a broader audience and also be authoritative. That's definitely not my strength. You introduced me as a practitioner, and that's what I've always been. I've been a practitioner. I've always benefited from colleagues who have had that excellent policy analysis and research backgrounds. I don't have that. So it's always better to stay away from something that you're not good at. It's again a process of self awareness. And finally, it was a simple principle of an 8 to 80, that anybody who's 8 years old or 80 years old and anyone in between should be able to relate to that. A person
Right.
on the street, a person who's just reading it on a train, a person who's just waiting for a coffee in a cafe and reading it on the Kindle. So, how do you make it relatable? Because I had the benefit of traveling to so many of these areas, like some of my colleagues, like yourselves, both you, Ranjan, Shashi, Naz, all of having been in that, but we are a minority. We are an absolute minority. So how do you engage the largely the urban audiences who have not had that benefit of seeing that part of India or that part of community? So that's why shown of all jargon, and shown of that kind of a reason. But I hope someday somebody will actually master that art of saying this is happening at the village level or a neighborhood level, and then link to some of those larger macro level issues.
Yeah, but I think what is laudable is this 8 to 80 principle, which is also like, in some sense, the one of the example that immediately that comes to mind is Sainath's wonderful book Everybody Loves a Good Drought. So, or probably even the writings of somebody like Ramchandra Guha, and Sunil Khilnani. These are people who have striven very hard to bring their disciplines into the dining room conversations of people like families like ours,
Yeah.
basically. And I think in that to that extent, yes, definitely, the book would appeal to a larger number of people, because the moment you put footnotes, the moment you take refuge in jargon, which is easier, and in fact this kind of writing is a lot more difficult, actually. Okay, so we with that we come to the end of this Girizada conversation with Girish, but then a couple of things remain. And as most of us who know Girish over the years, we also know that he sings. Uh, he also imitates people very well, but for today he has shied away from imitating. I still remember many of his imitation sessions in plan, and we would just roll on the floor. I was recollecting some of those with Girish this morning. But then, yes, the songs should come. And Naz, it's not me, it's Girish's day today. So he's going to sing us his favorite one or two songs, or maybe parts of those songs. And for reference sake, we have Rafi Saab's death anniversary that just went by on 31st July, and Kishore Das' birthday, which went on August 4th. So these are the two reference points. But I know, Girish, that you have your favorites in Mukesh also. So all yours, whichever you choose to sing.
Thank you, Giri. Always a challenge to sing in front of somebody like yourself, who's such an accomplished singer. But I'll definitely give it a go. Let me have a sip of water,
Yes,
just
yes,
to make
please. You
sure.
can prepare yourself.
Okay, so I'll sing a part of a Mohammed Rafi song and a part of a Kishore Kumar song. I'm always
Wonderful.
conflicted of who's the greatest between the two, so I've compromised and say both are absolute greats and they sit on top of my shelf.
Mohammad Rafi is like this, Kishore is like this.
That's another way to celebrate that,
Yes.
and and absolutely the depth versus the breadth, or the technical competence of singing vis-a-vis the versatile being a
Versatility.
versatile singer.
Yeah.
So yeah, two songs, bits of two songs, not two full songs. Both have been featured on Devanand.
Okay.
And both have been composed by S.D. Burman, one of the most accomplished music directors of the
Ever. Yeah.
ever. Yeah. um, and yeah, Mohammed Rafi is also very special because my mother is absolutely fond of Mohammed Rafi, and every July 31st she remembers his death anniversary.
I hope she is watching you. Yeah.
She did say that she's watching, so I hope she's there on the call. Okay. And again, to say both are slightly joyful songs. So because I tend to prefer joyful songs. So here it goes. ओ हो खोया खोया चांद खुला आसमां आंखों में सारी रात जाएगी तुमको भी कैसे नींद आएगी ओ खोया खोया चांद मस्ती भरी हवा जो चली मस्ती भरी हवा जो चली खिल खिल गई ये दिल की कली मन की कली में है खलबली के उनको तो बुलाओ ओ हो खोया खोया चांद. So that's Rafi.
Lovely, wonderful song. That's a
Thank you
beautiful
Wonderful.
very much.
song. Yeah,
Straying a bit with the early morning time here, but we'll still carry on.
I'm sure you've had your coffee.
I had my coffee, but it's the
No,
throat is
but
not
it's
as
come
best.
out very well. I think the rag was absolutely bang on. Yeah,
Thank you, thank you.
thank you so
And
much
now
for that.
for my all-time favorite Kishore song. हम्म, फूलों के रंग से दिल की कलम से तुझको लिखी रोज पाथी कैसे बताऊं किस किस तरह से पल पल मुझे तू सताती तेरे ही सपने लेकर के सोया तेरी ही यादों में जागा तेरे ख्यालों में उलझा रहा यूं जैसे के माला में धागा हाँ बादल बिजली चंदन पानी जैसा अपना प्यार लेना होगा जन्म हमें कई कई बार हाँ इतना मधुर तेरा मेरा प्यार लेना होगा जन्म हमें कई कई बार सांसों की सरगम धड़कन की बीना सपनों की गीतांजलि तू मन की गली में हरदम यूं महके जैसे जूही की कली तू छोटा सफर हो लंबा सफर हो सूनी डगर हो या मेला या तू आए मन हो जाए भीड़ के बीच अकेला हाँ बादल बिजली चंदन पानी जैसा अपना प्यार लेना होगा जन्म हमें कई कई बार हाँ कई कई बार.
Wow, 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 beautiful.
Thank you.
Girish, that was for Sandhya, I gather.
She listens to this all the time.
He listens to it all the time. So do say our hi to Sandhya and
Yeah.
Anurag and Anirudh as well.
Will do. Thank you.
And Ranjan, special thanks for your time for dropping in. And it's really like
Anytime,
old
man,
times.
anytime.
I
I
think
think
Nice to see you.
you should conduct such conversations on a regular basis, Giri.
yeah,
Such a
absolutely.
such a wonderful feeling. Getting in touch with people that you're associated with, and maybe you're in touch. Social media has its own advantages, but it's nothing like having a person to person conversation, even though virtually.
Absolutely.
Technology
Absolutely.
allows that, and I think that's something that we should practice more and more.
So,
Yeah.
Girish, we would look forward to having you once you complete your Memories from Afar series. Maybe, I mean, if I can ask, what is the next one going to be about?
Well, there are lots of things I've written about Africa and visits to some other countries. There's some fascinating visits that I've had to Pakistan, for instance, and I know it'll always create some ripples if I mention that. But I've had 4 visits to Pakistan. I've thoroughly enjoyed that. I've had the opportunity of being, I suppose, I haven't exactly counted, but probably about 15 to 17 countries in sub-Saharan Africa and to a few countries in Southeast Asia. Lots of stories from there. Again,
Wonderful,
powerful
wonderful.
stories of change.
Have
I
you
hope
written up some of these already?
I have written up some of them. Some of them are ideas. So hopefully, in the next couple of this has taken a long time anyway, because you need to commit that time to writing, and you need to be a bit disciplined
A
about
very
it.
solitary activity, anyway. Yeah.
Exactly, it's very solitary as well. So hopefully, this has encouraged me to say, okay, maybe I should give it a shot for the next bit, which is from other countries, like Kenya, lots of stories from Kenya, Ghana, Mali, Burkina Faso, Zambia, Malawi, Vietnam.
Wonderful,
So hopefully,
wonderful.
one day,
Yeah,
inshallah.
we look forward to that, and Girish Adda is always there to bring together people, people like you, Girish, who are doing remarkable work and who've had fascinating, trajectories and stories to tell. Um, Birthday greetings in advance to you, Girish, from Naz.
Thank
I
you.
see. Okay.
Pradeep,
Yeah,
Pradeep
yeah.
Kumar
Birthday greetings in
Pradeep
advance.
Kumar talks about the lovely song and beautiful singing, and Naz also
Thank you, Pradeep.
remembers the Bhopal days. I
Yeah.
think presumably your Action Aid days in Bhopal. Am I right?
Yes, Action Aid
Okay,
Regional Office in Bhopal. Yeah, yeah.
wonderful.
We worked together for 3 years,
Great.
and I think that was Naz's first rural kind of an exposure after having worked in urban Delhi projects. So a lot of work
Okay,
in Madhya Pradesh that Naz was also leading on and
correct,
responsible for.
correct. Yeah.
And thank you,
Okay,
Pradeep.
so thank you all, colleagues and friends, and again, wonderful to have you over, Girish. Take care,
Thank
and
you.
I think your day begins now after
My
this.
day begins
Back
now,
in
but thank
London.
you very much, Giri. It was wonderful
And
talking to you, and my best wishes to Savita, Nikhil, and Neha. And
thank
thank
you
you,
so much.
Ranjan, and thank you everybody else who has been there on this.
So Ranjan, if you happen to come to Hyderabad, let me know. We should catch up. And I believe Girish
Sure.
is in town next month, either in Chennai or Bangalore or Delhi. So we should definitely try and meet him at some point.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
I'll
let's
be in
all have
Bangalore.
a Sanda. And if we can also bring in Prabhakar as well. I tried reaching out to him. I wanted him to be popping in into the studio today, but unfortunately I couldn't get across. That would have been fun if Prabha had joined us as
Indeed.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
great. Thank
Well,
you very much,
Okay.
and have a lovely weekend, everybody. Take
You
care.
all
too.
of
You
take
Bye.
too.
care.
Take
Bye.
care.